Hospitals have always unsettled me, but children's wards are in a category of their own. The rooms are painted with bright cartoon murals, colorful posters line the hallways, and you'll even see stuffed animals tucked beside pillows. It's supposed to make the place less frightening. But when you're on the night shift, those same bright colors look faded and strange in the dim lights. The laughter and energy of daytime is gone, replaced by silence broken only by the occasional cough or the slow hiss of oxygen machines. It's an eerie silence, one that feels heavier in pediatrics than anywhere else in the hospital. I worked as a night nurse in pediatrics for 4 years, and in that time, I encountered something that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. I've never been able to explain it fully, and even now, when I tell people about it, they either think I was exhausted or exaggerating, but what I experienced was real. It started one night when I was doing routine rounds. I had 6 children under my care, ranging from toddlers to teenagers. Most were asleep by midnight, but kids wake often. Bad dreams, pain, fear, or just needing reassurance. That night, it was little Emma, a 5-year-old recovering from pneumonia, who called out first. I found her sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "There's someone in my room," she whispered. I checked, of course. The bathroom door was open, the corners of the room were clear, and the hallway outside was empty. I reassured her and tucked her back in, but as I turned off the small nightlight and stepped out, she said something that stopped me cold. "He's in the corner, the man with no face." I felt my skin crawl. I glanced back at the corner near the wardrobe, but there was nothing there. Just shadows stretching across the wall. I brushed it off, telling myself kids imagine things all the time, especially when they're sick and scared. But over the next week, I started hearing the same thing from other children. A boy in the room next to Emma's told me he hated sleeping because the tall man stood by his bed at night. A teenager recovering from a broken arm begged me not to turn off the hallway lights because he said something black and heavy watched him from the ceiling. Different children, different ages, different rooms, but always the same description: a shadowy man with no face. At first, I thought it was just kids feeding off each other's fears. Hospitals are stressful, and children are sensitive to things adults dismiss. But one night, while checking Emma again, I noticed something odd. The nightlight flickered, and in the corner of the room, just for a split second, I thought I saw something darker than the shadows. A tall shape that seemed to bend unnaturally, almost blending into the wall. When I turned my head, it was gone. My heart was pounding. I told myself it was exhaustion. Nurses run on caffeine and adrenaline. Our eyes played tricks on us, especially under fluorescent lights. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. Over the next month, the sightings escalated. Children would wake up screaming, pointing at corners or under their beds. One child tried to run into the hallway in the middle of the night, sobbing that the shadow was sitting on his chest. What unsettled me most was that the kids never described it differently. It was always the same: tall, black, faceless. I started dreading the night shift. I would catch myself glancing down hallways too long, waiting for something to move. The feeling of being watched became constant. And then, one night, I saw him clearly. I was restocking supplies near the nurses' station when the overhead lights dimmed for just a second. It wasn't unusual for the old building to flicker, but when I looked down the hallway, I froze. There was a figure standing at the end of the corridor. Tall, dark, motionless. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the doctors making rounds, but then I realized it wasn't lit like a person should be. The fluorescent bulbs overhead cast shadows normally, but this thing was the shadow. It stood perfectly still, too tall to be anyone I worked with shoulders that seemed to stretch unnaturally wide. And where the face should have been, there was nothing. Just a void, darker than the rest of the body. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't imagine it. I couldn't have. Because just seconds later, one of the monitors in Emma's room started shrieking with alarms. I sprinted down the hall, rushing past the spot where I'd seen the figure. When I got inside, Emma was awake and crying. She was clutching her chest, her tiny body trembling. "He was here again," she sobbed. "He was standing next to you." Her vitals normalized after a few minutes, and the doctor on call chalked it up to stress and nightmares. But I knew better, because when I pulled the blanket back over her, I noticed something on her wrist. 3 long, thin scratches, like fingers. I tried to push what I had seen out of my mind, but after Emma's scratches, I couldn't pretend anymore. Something was wrong in pediatrics. The next few nights, I became hyper-aware of everything. Every flicker of the lights, every odd beep of a monitor, every shadow on the wall. I kept telling myself not to feed into the paranoia, that the kids were influencing me, that my brain was primed to see what they described. But that excuse fell apart when another nurse saw him too. Her name was Melissa. She had been in pediatrics even longer than I had, and she was the type who didn't scare easily. One night around 3 a.m., I found her sitting at the station, pale as a sheet. "You okay?" I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "I saw someone. End of the hall, just standing there." But when I looked again, her voice trailed off and she shook her head. I don't know, maybe I'm losing it. I wanted to tell her she wasn't, that I had seen the same thing. But something in me hesitated. Maybe I was afraid that saying it out loud would make it more real. Instead, I just nodded and said, "We've all been overworked. Maybe we just need some rest." But deep down, I knew she had seen him. The encounters got worse after that. One night I was checking on a boy named Caleb. He was only 8, admitted for complications from asthma. When I opened the door, I found him sitting upright in bed, his face pale and sweaty. "He's here," Caleb whispered. I glanced around. The room looked empty, though the shadows in the far corner seemed thicker than usual. "Where, Caleb?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He raised a trembling finger and pointed to the ceiling above us. I tilted my head back slowly, and that's when I saw it. A massive, inky shape clung to the ceiling like a spider. Its limbs, if you could call them that, stretched unnaturally along the tiles, almost blending in with the dark. And then, in one smooth motion, it peeled itself off the ceiling and dropped into the corner of the room, landing without a sound. I froze. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure stood there towering, its faceless head tilted as if studying me. The monitor beside Caleb began to beep erratically, his breathing turning shallow. I snapped out of my paralysis and rushed to his side, fumbling with the oxygen mask. But I could feel it. The weight of the thing's presence pressing against my back, closer and closer. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow was gone. Caleb's breathing steadied, but tears streamed down his face. "You saw him too," he whispered. I didn't answer, because I couldn't lie. After that, I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just imagination. The kids weren't making it up. Whatever this was, it was real. But the strangest part came a week later. I was charting notes at the station when one of the parents, a young mother, approached me. Her son, Dylan, was recovering from surgery. She leaned in close and asked quietly, "Has anyone been coming into the rooms at night?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She glanced back at her son's room, lowering her voice even more. "He keeps waking up screaming. He says a tall man with no face stands at the foot of his bed. At first I thought it was just anesthesia side effects, but last night, I saw something too." I felt the hairs on my arms rise. "What did you see?" Her lips trembled. "A shadow, in the corner, watching us." From then on, it wasn't just the children. Parents, nurses, even a security guard once reported seeing a dark figure moving past the playroom on the cameras, except when he checked, no one was there. The hospital administration brushed it off, of course. They called it stress, fatigue, mass hysteria. But I knew better. We all did. And the longer it went on, the more aggressive it became. Lights would flicker violently whenever I entered certain rooms. Alarms would go off simultaneously in multiple rooms, forcing us to scatter. One night, The TV in the playroom turned on by itself, blasting static at full volume. But the worst moment came when I found scratches again. Not just on a child, this time on myself. It was after rounds. I was washing my hands in the bathroom when I noticed 3 long red marks across my forearm. They weren't deep, but they stung like fresh burns. I hadn't bumped into anything. I hadn't touched anything sharp. They had just appeared. That night, I didn't sleep after my shift. Every shadow in my apartment felt alive, stretching too far across the walls. And when I finally dozed off on the couch, I woke to the sound of whispering. Low, breathless, right next to my ear. I was alone. By now, Pediatrics felt less like a hospital ward and more like a hunting ground. The children grew restless at night, many refusing to sleep. I noticed a pattern. The sicker the child, the more often they reported seeing the shadow, almost as if it fed off weakness. One night around 4 a.m., everything came to a head. I was checking the vitals in room 214 when I heard it. A loud metallic crash from down the hallway. I sprinted out expecting to find equipment knocked over. But the hall was empty. The only thing out of place was the fire extinguisher lying on the floor. I bent to pick it up. That's when I felt it. A hand. Cold and heavy, pressing down on my shoulder. I spun around, heart in my throat. No one was there. But at the end of the hall, the shadow stood again, taller than ever, its head tilted in that unnatural, bone-snapping angle. And though it had no eyes, I knew it was staring right at me. The hallway lights buzzed, flickered, then went completely dark. For a full 5 seconds, I was blind. When the lights came back, the hallway was empty. But when I returned to the station, Melissa was waiting for me, her face pale and trembling. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. After that night, there was no denying it anymore. Whatever haunted Pediatrics wasn't just a figment of tired imaginations. It was real, and it was escalating. Melissa and I didn't talk about it openly, but there was a silent understanding between us. Every time we crossed paths on rounds, our eyes said the same thing. Did you see it again? Did it move? Did it get closer? The children were suffering too. Sleep-deprived, agitated, clinging to their parents with terrified eyes. Some refused to stay in their rooms altogether. They would beg to be kept in the hallways, even on the cold linoleum floors, because the man didn't like the light. The doctors dismissed it. The administration threatened to write us up if we kept feeding into hysteria. But no explanation could cover what was happening. One night, it went further than ever before. I was assigned to check on Dylan, the boy whose mother had also seen the shadow. He was pale, exhausted, barely eating. His mother sat by his bed, stroking his hair. "He won't close his eyes," she whispered. "He says if he does, the shadow will come closer." I crouched beside him, trying to reassure him, when I noticed the temperature in the room. It was cold, unnaturally cold. My breath clouded in front of me, something that should have been impossible inside a climate-controlled hospital. Then the monitor beside Dylan's bed beeped once and went completely dead. Before I could react, the overhead light flickered and went out too, plunging the room into darkness except for the faint glow of the hallway behind me. And that's when we all saw it. A towering shape in the corner, darker than the shadows around it. It began to move, slowly, deliberately, toward the bed. Dylan whimpered, hiding his face in his mother's arms. She clutched him tightly, her eyes wide with terror. I froze, every muscle screaming at me to do something, but what could I do against that? As the shadow loomed closer, the nightlight on the wall suddenly flared back on. The figure recoiled, its body seeming to collapse in on itself like smoke. Within seconds, it was gone. The monitor came back to life with a sharp beep. The overhead light buzzed back on, but the damage was done. Dylan's mother looked at me, tears in her eyes. "You saw it too," she whispered. I nodded. There was no denying it anymore. That night broke something in me. I went home after my shift, but sleep never came. I sat awake until dawn, staring at the corners of my apartment. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far, to move when I wasn't looking. For the first time, I started to wonder if this thing was confined to the hospital at all. A week later, I got my answer. It was my night off. I had tried everything to relax: warm bath, tea, even leaving every single light on in my apartment. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, and I drifted into a shallow sleep on the couch. That's when I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, moving across the floor. I shot upright, heart pounding. The apartment was silent again. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A tall black shape standing in the doorway of my bedroom. I couldn't breathe. My body refused to move. The figure stood there for what felt like hours, just watching me with that faceless void. And then, just as it had before, it tilted its head in that unnatural, bone-snapping angle. The lamp beside me flickered violently, then shattered, plunging the room into darkness. I scrambled for the light switch, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip it. When I flicked it on, the figure was gone. But on the wall beside my couch, 3 long black streaks burned into the paint, like claw marks. The next day, I went straight to Melissa. I didn't care how insane I sounded. I told her everything, that it had followed me home, that it wasn't bound to Pediatrics. Her face went pale. "It came to my house too," she whispered.